So you moved on from basic oil processing, and you need light oil and heavy oil. You need to make them into things. So heavy oil into lube, light oil into rocket fuel, for example. How do you do that? What's a nice simple way of setting that up? Well, first of all, you need to have your oil refineries set to do the advanced oil processing recipe, and that requires you to bring in the crude oil and water. So let's assume you've done that. That's all set up. Now, one of the things you want to do basically is bring all of your outputs together. So a nice simple way of doing this is to do this configuration of pipes. Now, with the change of allowing you to flip refineries and the pipe locations shifting as a result, this is not as necessary, this design. It used to be a nice way of doing it. There are all sorts of other ways of setting the things up now, and I'd encourage you to experiment, find a way that works for you, that you like. I know what a lot of people do is they'll take one of the materials out, for example, away, because that's the one they want the most, sort of thing, which is petroleum, and they'll maybe connect all of those together over here, so it's a separate pipe going that way, and that's the thing you want the most of, so that's why you have it as a separate thing. But I tend to stick with the old way of doing it, this configuration, unless I'm feeling in a particularly creative mood. But yes, this brings all of your materials together. So now what have you got there? Effectively what you've got is a fluid bus. So you've got a heavy oil, a light oil pipe, and a petroleum pipe. Okay, so effectively you've got three materials that you want to use and process. Now, what you will find is that your desire, your need for the materials does not match the default ratios. So as a default ratio, it takes in 100 crude oil and 50 water and turns it into 25 heavy oil, 45 light oil, and 55 petroleum gas. So the 100 doesn't become a nice, it doesn't divide into 20, 20 and 60 sort of thing. It's not a nice simple conversion from 100 to 100, and that's because the water comes into it as well. But it also doesn't convert to 150. So 150, where you're getting 100 crude oil in and 50 water in, doesn't become a total of 150 out. You lose 25 in the process. So 25 plus 45 plus 55 is 125, unless my maths has gone wonky. Now, I'm mentioning that because oil ratios can be a bit of a pain. If you're trying to do them properly, then it can be difficult to balance up all the numbers. You need to know how much you're going to demand of each product and carefully match the production to that requirement. However, there are simpler ways of getting around it, but it does involve messing about with the circuit network system, but in a very simple way. So let's talk about that very quickly. Basically, we probably want the most petroleum. Now, assuming we're not supplementing that petroleum from somewhere else, we're purely doing it via advanced oil. We almost certainly want more petroleum than we want heavy oil and light oil. Heavy oil we're really only going to convert into lubricant, and light oil we are going to use for quite a few things, but basically the most demand is going to come from petroleum. So what we want is a way of turning heavy oil and light oil into petroleum, or getting rid of them in some way. Now, one of the ways you can get rid of them, the simple option, is to turn them into to solid fuel. So you can simply convert heavy oil and light oil into solid fuel. You do that with a chemical lab. So chemical lab there has recipes for converting those into solid fuel, and that will just sort of get rid of them. Particularly if you're making them into rocket fuel, you can make that from any of these three. So you can use that to help you get rid of and balance up the materials. The other thing you can do, and what we're really going to talk about today, is converting them into the other products. So heavy oil can be converted into light oil, and light oil can be converted into petroleum. Now, that's actually a relatively good analogy for how it actually works in real life. You can what's called crack heavy oil into heavier oil products into lighter oil products, and it's pretty much what you do in the game. Okay, and so what we need to do in order to make that happen is we need to use a chemical lab again, and we need to set the recipe to this cracking. So heavy oil cracking to light oil. Okay, and what that does is it takes in heavy and water and outputs light. Okay, so if we say that we've got a train somewhere, you know, well, I'm not going to put all this in, but we've got a train somewhere, it's loading up with heavy oil, or maybe we're just directly converting it to lube, you know, but that's going off, there's some train there, it's filling up and it's taking what it needs. And we will have excess, because that's how the game is kind of designed. So, what we can do is we can say that if we have an excess, turn it into light oil. Okay? And we would do that by hooking this up. Obviously, we need water as well. We've got a water line here. So we need to take a little spur off of this. And we will connect that to that pipe. In fact, let's just put that like that. Okay? So this is now ready to accept. Oh, these are all filled up, basically. It's one of the problems when you're working on the system. When it all fills up, it stops producing. So we haven't really got any heavy oil in these pipes. I've also not connected that one because it's filled up with light and petroleum. But yes, so imagine we've got this heavy oil, and what we want to do is convert it into light oil, because eventually we're going to want to convert that light oil into petroleum, because that's what we need the most of. But here, this is a very crude system where all we're doing is we've got a tank here that's slowly filling up, giving us a bit of a buffer for our trains, for example. But our train could arrive, and if this isn't controlled, then it's converted it all into light oil, and we want heavy oil. So what we can do is we can use the circuit system to put in a very, very simple condition that says only make light oil from heavy, so only convert the heavy to light, if there's so much heavy oil that we don't know what to do with. And we would do that by very simply taking one of our wires, it doesn't matter which one, we connect our pump to our tank, which is our buffer that's just going to fill up and fill up, remember, and we say to that pump, using the circuit connection, which appears because we've added a circuit wire to it, enable disable, so turn on or turn off if we have more than. I'm going to do a whole thing explaining these operators because I don't think they're as widely known as you might think. But if the amount of heavy oil goes above a certain number, and we're going to put that to 2,000, so 2K, because this tank holds 25,000. So that means that if it gets so full that there's more than 2,000 heavy oil in it, this will turn on. So if I again flush the system so it makes a bit more, it probably won't reach that. In fact, if I set it to a lower number so that we're going to at least demonstrate it, if we set that to say 200 or something. Yeah, so it's the red dot there shows that this pump is disabled. There is no heavy oil being pushed into it's stuck here because I'm not using this either. So if we flush that, so this is now, got plenty of room for heavy oil in it. So again, I probably need to flush again. So this is the big problem. This is why you need to manage it in this way, because these pipes fill up and suddenly you stop producing what you actually want. Yeah. So if this, it must have hit. There you go. So I don't know if you saw that flash. It went green. It got above 200, so it pumped it into here. Now it didn't do anything because this is all filled up. Okay, but that's the basic principle. You put a tank in, and you put a connecting wire, so one of the circuit network wires, and then you say to the pump, only turn on, to enable, if the amount of heavy oil goes above 200. So that means that if a train comes in and tries to fill up with heavy oil, there will be heavy oil, because it will have buffered an amount of heavy oil. But if the train's not coming, and there's heavy oil just backing up, then this pump will send it to be turned into light oil. Okay? Because as we know, all you need heavy oil for really is lube. And once you've got enough lube, it will just back up the heavy oil. So we can get rid of the heavy oil by turning it into light oil. But that's going to give us another problem, because now we've both got the output from this. So we might, for example, and obviously you want more machines, and this is where you get into your ratios and all that sort of stuff, if you want to do that stuff. So let's say we have several of these machines, and we want to feed it back into the main system, because somewhere there'll be a train collecting light oil, and now we've got the light oil that this is producing, the 45 out of 100 for that, as well as it's taking, say, all of that 25 heavy oil, and this recipe is taking in 40, and this is, as I say, you get quite complicated maths and ratios, but you don't need to bother with that. All you need to do is make sure you've got, if it's backing up, and you've got this thing here, and it's still backing up, add more chemical plants. That's all you really need to do, until it starts to drop. And then that means that you are exceeding, production-wise, you're exceeding the amount of supply, and you won't drain it dry, because that's what this pump is preventing. Okay, so that's a very simple, inelegant, solution, but it works. But yes, now we're getting the light oil and the heavy oil that's been converted into light oil, and so this is going to back up even quicker. Now, as it happens, we have several. What we really want to convert the light oil into is solid fuel, because the ratio is better. For both petroleum and heavy oil, we get 1 solid fuel out of 20 heavy oil. For light oil, we get 1 solid fuel out of 10 light oil. So you get twice as much for just simply using a different recipe. You don't have to do anything different. You just use a different recipe with light oil, and you get more solid fuel, and you're going to want a lot of solid fuel for your rockets. So ideally we want plenty of light oil, but it will not be enough demand to use it all. The thing we will really want is petroleum. So what we need to do is use the second recipe that we're given with cracking, the light oil, into petroleum cracking. It's exactly the same in that it uses water as well. So we also need to connect up some water. So let's do that. Obviously you need to work out some nice layouts for yourself, but these are the principles, in that you take your heavy and turn it into light, and you take your light and you turn it into petroleum. But we can do the same thing. This doesn't need to be directly converted. We don't want to turn all of our light into petroleum, because we want some petroleum. So we do the same thing. So let's do another pump. I'm going to do another configuration here, but it's exactly the same. So where that was sideways, this is now downwards. You can connect it to any of these. It's not dependent on where it connects or anything like that. But we again want a wire connection. Did I use green before? Yes. So let's just use red to prove that it's exactly the same. No difference. So we connect the red wire up, and it's already showing us this option. But again, we only enable if the light oil goes above, and again, let's just say 2000. Okay, so if we fill up somehow now with light oil, then we'll do that. But a mistake I've made here is that I've connected my output from this to have a signal control, but our output from the actual refineries is not going there. So what we actually want to do is make sure that all of our light oil goes through this control system, basically. So we want to make sure, get a bit of the old pipe spaghetti, but all of our light oil now will go through this, both from our output from our heavy and also from there. So by connecting a train to the heavy, we can take that somewhere else. By connecting a train to the light, we can take that somewhere else and use it. But when there's so much light oil that this train, wherever it is causing it all to back up, or this is outputting so much that it causes it to back up, then this will say, right, we need to convert all of this excess light oil into petroleum. Again, this is backed up, and we would connect this to our petroleum. I've obviously done this in a very messy, spaghetti type way, to show you that you don't need perfect blueprints, you don't need perfect maths. All of that stuff is entirely optional. You might want to do it, you might not want to do it. Now, because you're turning your heavy into light, and this recipe fundamentally produces more light than heavy, you'll need more chemical labs to process your light into petroleum. It's just a simple maths thing. We're taking 45 rather than 25, plus what comes out of here, and so we're getting way more light oil, which is good because we want to turn it into rocket fuel. But if there's so much that it backs up, then we want to convert it into petroleum, because we will have loads of uses for petroleum. Petroleum is the most commonly used oil product. You know, it goes into batteries, which we want our bots and, you know, robot flying frames, and so we use it in the gold science, so we've got an infinite demand for it there. We need it for plastic, and plastic is used in red circuits, and several of these use red circuits, so we've got an infinite demand there. Sulfur we can also convert into sulfuric acid, and sulfuric acid we use for mining uranium, for example. So we have lots and lots and lots of uses for petroleum, but only a couple of uses for heavy oil and light oil. And as I say, this basic recipe doesn't produce enough petroleum to satisfy what we need. It's just the way the game is designed. So we have to convert heavy and light into the lower materials, so heavy into light, light into petroleum, in order that we can do a very simple, very crude balancing system, such as this, that says, right, if there's too much heavy, turn it into light. If there's too much light, turn it into petroleum, because we will always have demand for petroleum. So yeah, this isn't perfectly ratioed, this isn't neatly built. That's the point. You don't have to do all that stuff. Don't get overwhelmed by that side of it. Just throw it together and use the cracking to make it balance. And as I say, you can also just convert it. You might say, instead of this, I want to turn it into solid fuel, you know, and that's the solid fuel you'll use for your tank or something. You have options, but generally speaking, you want to crack to balance. Crack to balance.